Hello and welcome to Mr. Marshall Flipped. Today we're looking at the skeletal and muscle system. Okay, these are two really important systems for holding us together and moving us around. We'll start with the skeletal system and we'll move on to the muscle system as we go through the video. So, the skeletal system has 5 main roles. The first role is support, second is protection, third is to provide movement, fourth is minerals storage, and fifth is blood cell formation. Now we're going to look at those first three here now today, mineral storage and blood cell formation. We're going to leave that for the circulatory and digestive systems later on because they're more important there than they are here. First off, support. All our organs, our skin, everything is all made of soft tissue. This is really important because if it was all hard, it wouldn't be able to do the jobs that it needs to do. But it also needs something to support it. If we don't have that support, we would just be a blob on the ground. And to show this, I've got an example of what a jellyfish looks like. So a jellyfish doesn't have a skeleton. It is just soft tissue. And it looks fantastic in the water. Really beautiful. Got that nice long shape. Fantastic. But if you take it out of water, put it on land, it cannot support itself. It's using that water to support it. For us, we've got the skeleton, we've got the bones to provide that support so that we keep our shape. The second thing is protection. So we have two parts to our skeleton, and this yellow part up here, that is our axial skeleton. That is the bit that protects us. So you can see right up here, right up the top, we have the skull, jaw, spine, and then our rib cage. These all provide protection for different things. Protection for our brain, protection for the vital organs in our head. Rib cage provides protection for our lungs, our heart, all of that really important stuff. And then our spine down our back provides protection for our spinal cord. If we didn't have protection for that, we wouldn't be able to have the range of movements and control over our bodies that we do. Okay? Then we have the appendicular skeleton. This is the blue part of the picture. This is our limbs. This is the bit that helps us get around. We can live without our arms and our legs, but then we need someone else to help us, give us support. These parts of our skeleton are what let our body move around and let us manipulate our environments. Now, bones are pretty important in the way that they're put together. If we had just really rigid, strong bones, and we put them under some forces, they'd actually break pretty easily. And our bones are under a lot of force. Have you ever felt how heavy someone's head is? We're actually carrying around our head all the time. I know it might seem a little bit silly to say that, but our head weighs a lot. And so our neck and our spine is actually supporting and holding up our head the entire time. And there's a compression force. Our head is pushing down on all of these vertebrae in our spine. So bones need to support that squishing motion. But then they also get stretched. Imagine say you're back in primary school, you're hanging off of the monkey bars, your arms are going to be stretched and your bones are going to be being stretched as well. They just pulled a little bit. So they need to be strong. They also need to be a little bit elastic. Okay? And also they need to be light enough to let us move. And so this is what a cross-section of a bone looks like. We've got on the very outside what we call compact bone. This is the really hard stuff, and this is what people generally think bone looks like and is made of. The really tough outside section. But what you'll notice in this picture is there's a really honeycomb section through the end. This is what we call the spongy bone because it looks a little bit like a sponge, and that holds red marrow. And then down the center you can see that the bone is hollow and it's what's got called yellow marrow in it. Okay, the yellow marrow has it's a jelly-like fatty substance, and it sort of sits there and fills up the space and makes the bone a little bit lighter. But on the ends, that red bone marrow is what produces things like red blood cells and platelets and all that sort of stuff. And as you can see, we've got those blood vessels going into the bone and then coming back out again as well. And we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Now, bones are all well and good, but if we just had that structure, it would be like a building. You wouldn't be able to move. So we need some way to move, and that's where we get into our bone joints. Okay, and this is an image of a bone joint. Now, to get past a misconception, when we've got bones, they don't actually touch. There's not, like, they're not right up against each other. There's a little bit of a gap. If you look at that picture, pretend these are two bones. Along this edge is what we call cartilage, and same with the other edge. And what that does is that protects the bone. Okay, and then in between we have what's called synovial fluid. Synovial fluid basically is like the oil or the grease in between, so they're not actually touching and wearing away at each other. When they move, they've got that little bit of a gap. And then we've got a ligament. The ligament goes from one to the other and basically makes sure they can't come too far apart. They stay pretty close together. Now, that's all well and good, but we need something else. We need different types of joints, because different types of joints provide different types of movement, and we're going to look at 4 of them. The first one we're going to look at is a hinge joint. Now, a hinge joint is pretty simple. Basically, as you can see, it's got a cup. Actually, let's go on this side. It's got a cup, and then the joint goes in there, and it can move in one direction. That's really good for providing a lot of strength, okay, but not a lot of movement. So things like the joint between, here we are, between my upper arm and my lower arm is a hinge joint. My arm can move in that direction, this joint, but it can't move side to side. If I'm doing that, that movement there is actually this joint over here. It's not this joint here. The next, that joint is in your arm, it's in your leg, at your knee, it's also in your finger joints. They can go only in that one direction, they can't go anywhere else. The next one we have is the ball and socket joint, okay? This is the idea. You've got a socket and the ball goes in there, and it has basically 360-degree movement. It can move in any direction. And this is what's in your shoulder. This is why your shoulder can go all the way around. It's also what's in your hip. That's what lets you turn your knees out and around. It's not as wide a range of movement in your hip as your shoulder, but it's still pretty good. The next one is a pivot joint. It's a bit like you've got a finger of bone sticking up and then a ring around it which lets it twist, lets it pivot. Okay, it's the joint that's in the base of your neck. That's what lets you turn your head side to side. If we didn't have that, you wouldn't be able to look over your shoulder. Excellent. Last one is the saddle joint. Now this is a bit like 2 cups, one on top of the other one. It's got a bit of movement this way, a bit of movement that way, but it's not quite the same range of movement as a ball and socket joint. This is the joint that you have in your ankle, which lets you move around a bit, but not as much as your shoulder or your hip. And same with your thumb. Lets you move in and out and side to side. Okay, you got that range of movement, but it's not the crazy extent. Like I can't make my thumb go all the way back the other way like you can with your arm. Bones by themselves are useful, but without the muscles, you're not going to be able to do much, okay? And the muscles pull the bones around. You actually have sets of muscles working together, attached by tendons to the bones. And the muscles have to be in what are called antagonistic pairs. The reason they're called antagonistic pairs is because they're working against each other, right? So let's have a look at an example in my arm. We've got our biceps and our triceps. So this is what your biceps look like. They're the muscles in the front of your arm, And when you want to lift up your arm, this muscle here contracts. It pulls together, gets smaller. You can see it in the picture bunching up, and your arm comes up. The other muscle, your triceps at the back, they loosen to let your arm come up. If they both tightened, then you wouldn't be able to lift your arm because they'd be pulling against each other. If you want to move your arm back the other way, you use your triceps. You can see now that the bicep has lengthened out while the tricep has bunched up and pulled together to move that arm back down. You're doing all of these sorts of contractions and relaxations all the time. Your body's used to it and your brain's used to it, so you don't really even need to think about it. You're not thinking, I need to contract this muscle and relax this muscle. Your brain does all of that for you. You just need to think, I want to move my hand up, down, left, right, whatever. It will fill in all the gaps for you. The last thing I want to really quickly touch on is injuries. Now, injuries can be really devastating, but our body has a way of dealing with that. So our bones are living tissue. What that means is if my bones break, they're going to slowly heal and repair each other. And usually it takes about 6 weeks for a break to heal. And what we do is we put it in a cast. You guys have probably seen casts around before. Those casts are there to hold the bone together and in the right shape so that it doesn't twist, it doesn't pull, so that it sets in that right position. The other thing that we talk about when we're talking about injuries is with our muscles, with our tendons and ligaments. So if you stretch a ligament too far, it can tear, and that's called a sprain. If you stretch and tear a muscle or a tendon, okay, remember tendons are what are attaching our muscles to our bones. If either of those tear, it's called a strain. And both of these can be very painful, and we can't use those muscles like we would like. If it's a minor strain or a minor sprain, we can do what's called the RICE method. Okay, the RICE method of first aid. It's called RICE because it's an acronym. R stands for rest. So if you've been running around, you tear something, you don't want to keep on running around, you're going to do more damage. You want to stop, sit down, and rest it. The second, I, stands for ice. Ice is really important. It helps cool down the muscle. It helps it from expanding and really swelling up big. We don't want it to swell up big. We want to keep it nice and small and basically in the same state as it was when it started. So rest, ice, and the next thing is compression. So that ice will be pushing on there, we'll be holding it together, making sure that it's not going to swell up big. The last one is elevation. This is really important because it's harder for the body to push blood uphill, and blood will be transporting or blood and also the lymphatic system will be pushing up things to the wound to try and help it get better. But one of the things that happens is usually too much stuff gets there and it swells up big. We don't want it to swell up big. We want to be able to use it and for it to heal quicker. If we elevate something, all of that liquid can't get up as quickly and easily, so it's going to stay a smaller size. We don't want, so I broke my wrist, I don't want this giant wrist here where I can't move it at all. I want to rest it, put ice on it, compress it, and elevate it so that it heals quicker and it isn't as big an injury in the first place. I hope that was really helpful. We looked at the skeletal muscle system. We looked at what the skeleton looks like, what bones look like, what joints we have in our body, and where they are. We also looked at muscles and how they're in antagonistic pairs. And we had a little bit of a look at some of the injuries we can sustain related to our muscles and bones. Next time, we're going to start looking at the circulatory system and how blood moves around the body and how we get all the things where they need to go within the human body.